Ron's official bio. Ron Charles has served as fiction editor for the Washington Post book world since 2005. In 2009, he won the Best Criticism Award from the National Book Critics Circle. Prior to joining the Post, he was a book reviewer at the Christian Science Monitor. What Ron tends to leave out of his official bio is the mention of his alter ego. Ron is known across the internet as the totally hip video book reviewer. If you haven't seen Ron's hilarious and insightful videos, check them out at YouTube or thewashingtonpost.com. So without further ado, I'll turn the stage over to Ron to introduce the wonderfully talented and prolific writer, Stewart O'Nan.
Thank you, Ron.
Ron, thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, my balance here. I have to sit up straight.
I think I should have like a banjo here.
Oh, jeez. Born in 1961 in Pittsburgh, Stewart O'Nan began his working life as an aerospace engineer. But in the late 80s, he gave up that risky career for the financial security of writing fiction.
Literary fiction.
Literary fiction.
Not just fiction.
Since then, he has quietly but methodically become one of the most celebrated authors in America. Granta magazine once put him on their list of the best young writers in the country. His latest novel, his 13th, 14th?
Somewhere on there.
Yeah, 13th or 14th. The Odds received raves in newspapers like the Washington Post from critics like me.
Yay!
And magazines across the
Thank
country.
you, Ron.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Well, you can pay me later.
I will.
Now, it's safe to say that most successful literary fiction writers are not coming from engineering.
I don't know if that's true or not.
That is definitely true.
Well, Norman Mailer, aeronautical engineer.
I didn't know
George Saunders, chemical engineer.
I should have prepared.
Archie Ammons, chemical engineer. So there are some.
What?
Thomas Pynchon, tech writer for Boeing.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know
That guy, yeah.
Well, what
There's
effect
some
do you
of
think that sort of background, your science background, has on your own fiction? Which hasn't really concentrated on science.
Well, like you said, methodical. I'm a very methodical person, very detail-oriented. And I guess in the later work, that acquiescence to reality, how things really would be. You know, I think you said in Songs for the Missing that this wasn't sort of fiction or storytelling. This was reality, and trying to sort of bring that across to the reader in a very meticulous way.
Now, you bring out a book almost every year. You've done this for...
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it seems like that. But some of them are very, very thin. Really great for book groups, right? No one can say I didn't have time. You know?
How do you practically maintain a schedule like that? I mean, how do you make sure that inspiration stays on the timetable?
I don't have a job. I don't have a job. I don't have health insurance. I don't have a pension, like a lot of people. No, it's all I do. It's really all I do, and I treat it as sort of a full-time job. So if I'm working on something, I try to get to my desk at 9 o'clock, and I try to finish at 5 o'clock.
Do you put on a tie and jacket and the whole thing?
Well, sometimes I put on a blanket. I write in my attic, which does not have heat, which is in Pittsburgh. So it's, and I try to get a page out. One good double-spaced page, which
About
is 300 words, which is really not that much. But they pile up. And, they continue to pile up. And remember, I mean, the publishing schedule is always, for us, about a year behind, the production schedule. So I'm always trying to sort of, in that year between finishing one and putting another one out, I try to get another one going so I'm not so distracted by the touring.
Okay, all right.
Because I've been doing a lot of that.
Right. Now, there are thousands of novels being published every year, tens of thousands. Yeah. How do you mentally find space?
And no Pulitzer Prize winner. Go figure. Go figure.
That was ridiculous.
0 for 10,000.
Just ridiculous. There were plenty of great novels last year.
Reminds me of some of the pirates, 0 for 10,000.
How do you mentally create a space for your novel among such bounty?
Oh, well, you don't. I mean, you don't worry about everything else that's being published, and you don't worry about sort of the public reaction. You try to get close, for fiction at least, you try to get close to the character and understand who they are and all the things that they have going on in their life. And you begin to sort of believe in them and care about them and inhabit that world and inhabit them. And if you do that and you get their emotional world across to the reader, then I think that's basically it. So that's, why I think lately some of the books have been, I guess you'd call sort of like super non-commercial.
But they're doing well.
You know, they seem to be doing well, but when I told my agent about Emily Alone, I said, well, it's a story about an 80-year-old woman and her dog. She lives by herself in Pittsburgh, and he's like, what happens? And I'm like, life, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, and so they don't look like they're going to be, you know, the big. They don't have big explosions.
No.
You know, there's not a big, you know, where's the love interest kind of thing. You know, Hollywood is not really sort of clamoring for these books. But I hope that there's some intimacy there, in that then the reader can bring their life and the people that are closest to them and how they feel about them into the books. Whereas sometimes in a sort of heavily plotted, and what Tim O'Brien would call hokey book, there's no room for your real feelings. And if there's no room for your real feelings, then you're not going to be moved. And that to me is the most important thing about a novel for me. The best thing a novel can do for me is move me.
Right.
You know, I'm moved by William Maxwell, So Long, See You Tomorrow. I'm moved by that book. I'm moved by To the Lighthouse. Sometimes I can see a performance and say, wow, that's glitzy and flashy and glamorous and wonderful, and the prose is very bejeweled and marvelous, but I'm like, it's kind of empty in a way.
But when you're writing one of these novels, like Emily Alone or The Last Night at the Lobster, how do you know where, if it's so unplotted, how do you know when you're done? How do you know where you are? Are you at the middle or are you at the end?
Well, I mean, usually these books, even if they're not plotted, they're about expectation and reality. Mm-hmm. And there's certain days in our lives that are supercharged, where we're really sort of on total alert. And for Last Night at the Lobster, it is the very last night there. So everything takes on a certain significance to Manny because he cares about everything.
Right.
And he cares desperately about everything. He cares too much sometimes about things. So I know that things are going to stick to him, so he's my motivated point of view narrator. He has expectations for the night, and as the night goes on, those expectations are either met or the reality is disappointing there. And by the end of the night, he comes to some place of coming to terms or some place of rest. So there's an initial imbalance there where everything is thrown off balance, and then in the end there is some place of rest where, at least lately in these books, the characters go on and continue to live their lives.
Right.
Whereas in the early books, terrible things happened and very bad things, yeah.
It would be hard to characterize a Stewart O'Nan novel. You've written a lot of different things. Historical fiction, thrillers, a ghost story, romantic comedy, The Odds. It's kind of a romantic comedy.
Horror novel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that intentional? Are you trying to create a kind of variety for yourself?
Well, it keeps me interested.
A challenge?
Yeah, I think of the director Howard Hawks.
Yes.
I mean, Hawks made The Thing from outer space. Mm-hmm. He made, Red River. He made The Big Sleep. To Have and Have Not. I mean, he showed, a great versatility because he was interested in all these different types of stories and these different forms of storytelling. And I am too. I mean, I love to read all different kinds of books. So it kind of makes sense that I'd want to write very different kinds of books instead of just the same, here's a mystery, here's a mystery, here's a mystery, here's a mystery, here's a mystery. I mean,
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, well, I get, again, those become, even at their best, they're just performances. They don't really move me that much.
All right.
I'm not that interested. I don't bring my life and my feelings into those books.
I've heard you tell your students that they should push themselves outside their comfort zones.
Yeah, move away from your comfort zone. Move away from your habits.
And what are your comfort zones that you keep pushing yourself away from?
Incredible amount of detail.
Oh, really?
An amazing, way too much detail. I'm always trying to thin that out because it just takes over. It proliferates. It's like weeds. You got to keep just pulling them out and throwing them out. Language, to make the language less musical, to work
make
less
the language
with sound.
less musical is
yeah,
one of your
to make it
goals.
crunchier, I think, because I find that so much of, especially American writing, is about the surface of the prose and how beautiful the surface of the prose is. Well, I mean, the writers that move me, Chekhov in translation, in those clunky old Constance Garnett translations, or Tolstoy in the same translations. It's not the prose, it's not the surface that moves you, it's the story that's underneath, right? It's the dream that rises up there. And the words are just sort of a medium to get there. So let's forget about the medium and get to the actual story.
Well, so what do you do when you get a student who really writes in that sort of rich, musical, ironic style that is that in contemporary American literature is very prized?
Since 1992?
Right. So what do you do
20
with someone
years
like,
ago?
What do you do with someone like that?
Well, first you say, look, you know, if you're going to do this, you have to do it either different or you're going to have to do it better. There's no point, if you're not doing it different or better, then why write it?
Right.
Why write it at all? For money? And it takes too much time and effort and work to worry about money. I mean, you can work 3, 4, 5 years on a book and make, you know, maybe 50 cents an hour. Something, if you're lucky, right? If you're very lucky.
You sell it, yeah.
So do it different or do it better. And if they're doing their own thing, that's great. But if they're aping David Foster Wallace or Michael Chabon or Rick Moody or Jeffrey Eugenides or Jonathan Franzen, there's really no point to it because you're never going to out Franzen, right? You're never going to out Joyce. So, you know, if do your own thing, do it different. Or if you're writing, say, a mystery or any kind of genre book, do it better. You know, we don't need a copy of a copy of a copy.
Right. There are authors we know, like John Irving, who use up their own lives in their fiction very self-consciously. You don't seem to be doing that, are you?
Oh, I do. Certainly I do.
Are you in a bad marriage right now?
Definitely do. No.
You can tell us.
I'm married to my high school sweetheart. We've been married for almost 30 years now, which is.
Have you been gambling?
I wish. I wish I had the money to gamble. You know. I tend to use a lot of my life and the people closest to me and my feelings about them. I mean, certainly every character is going to be me.
Emily?
Is going to be, of course. It's like Madame Bovary, c'est moi, right?
Yes.
You know, Emily, sure, that's me. I mean, everything that she feels, everything.
What do you know about an 80-year-old woman?
Well, obviously a lot. I mean, I've spent probably 1,200 pages with her. You get to know these characters, even if they're very, very different from you and the way that you live your own life. You spend so much time dreaming about them and thinking about them that it's like Salinger says, when you finish the book and you have to do something else, you kind of begin to miss them a lot. And yeah, and I miss Emily, and I miss the Fowlers, and I miss Marjorie from Speed Queen, weirdly enough, or Jacob from Prayer for the Dying. You miss these characters just because you've been so close to them and so intimate with them. Because I think you have to get that close if the reader is going to get that close. Right. And most readers are not even going to bother getting that close. They'll read on the surface. But the people that really want to dig in and sort of dive into that world, you want that to be there for them. And that intimacy, that relationship, that's what makes a book, to me, that's what makes a book great and a book that I'll return to.
Right.
Because I know I can spend that time with those people again.
Right. Yeah. I felt like I knew Emily, like you knew Emily, like she existed.
Yeah, well, I feel that way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's. I'm sure it's just a trick. It's just a fictional trick, But having that familiarity with them, keeping a notebook about them and thinking about what words they would say and what words they wouldn't say and where they go every day, and you have all this. You have this world that has weight and extension that even if you don't put it in the book, sometimes the reader can feel it, that you know it.
It's not just emotional empathy with you. I understand you do a lot of actual practical research, too?
Oh, yeah, tons.
Talk about that.
Tons. Way too much. Way too much. Yeah. My wife says I only write the novel so that I can do the research. and that's true.
What kind of research would you do for Emily alone?
Well, gardening. I know nothing about gardening whatsoever, and I knew that one of the big scenes was going to the flower show with Arlene. Yes. So I got to nail that scene. I got to get that scene right. So I end up actually going to Phipps Conservatory and going to the flower show and taking pictures and taking notes and looking at everything and spending time there and just being there doing location scouting, but then also sort of sifting it and selecting it and really thinking hard about it.
Right. Did you go to Niagara?
Yeah, twice.
Really?
Oh yeah, we went on Valentine's Day weekend.
Just as the book did.
Talk about tempting fate. Yeah, yeah. I love to do that research, and it's funny because you think of writers, they spend most of their time alone in a room.
Yes.
But when I'm outside of the room, what I'm writing sort of energizes me and brings me out into the world to look at the world a lot harder and to take note of everything. Was it James that said a writer is someone upon whom nothing is lost? There. When I'm writing and I'm connected to the character, I connect to the real world a lot more. Between books, I become duller and dumber in a way, just because I'm not quite as alert.
And tell me about these questionnaires I understand you've used.
The questionnaires. Well, that was for Emily especially. I was doing a tour with, it might have been Songs for the Missing, it might have been Last Night at the Lobster. But I would do a lot of readings at libraries in the middle of the day out in Connecticut. Yes. And most of my audiences were people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so I said, wow, this is the people that I'm writing about. I should just ask them directly. I mean, what's better than a first-person source? So I put together a questionnaire of all these questions that I had that I wanted.
Like what?
Well, I mean, how has your neighborhood or town changed? You know, if you've lived in a town for 30, 40, 50 years, you've seen a lot of changes. Right. And that's what Emily's going through. She's seen her neighborhood change. What neighbors are gone now that you miss and why? You know?
And you found people would respond to these questions?
Yeah,
Some would?
Yeah, a lot would. I think people, you know, they like getting their own stories out. Like when I was doing the Red Lobster book, I would ask servers and people that worked at these fast food restaurants or casual dining restaurants, what do I have to get in the book? What do you really want to say about your experience? Yes. And the servers, to a person, said, get the mother in there that doesn't sort of discipline her child, that lets the child just go nuts. That's got to be in there. And I was like, I can do that. So I made sure that I got it in there. And that's usually what I do. If I'm writing about a subculture that I have not been part of, say the families of prisoners there, I will ask them, I'll say, what does the world not know about what you're going through and your experience?
That seems more emotionally difficult than talking to servers.
Yeah. But again, you will find people that won't talk to you about it, and then you'll find people that will tell you everything about it, right? I mean, they say there's two kinds of Vietnam veterans: the ones who won't say a word and the ones who won't shut up. Yes. You know. So then again, every first person's unreliable. So you have to sort of take what they say with a little bit of grain of salt, because remember, they're trying to frame their own experience as well. Sure. And you want both sides of the experience, right? You want the heroic side of the experience and sort of the non-heroic side as well. So you have to sort of get some perspective on it.
You did that for Songs for the Missing too?
For the Missing. Oh yeah, for Songs for the Missing. I mean, pretty much any book that I'm dealing with a subculture that I am not from, and which is most of them, right. I will go to the people that have actually lived through the experience, especially after I get a draft together, and I'm kind of happy with where it is. I'll give it to them and say, look, you know this world. Tell me what's wrong with this. Just factually, what is wrong with this? And people being, proud of their experience and wanting to be represented truthfully will come back and say, well, that's wrong, and that's wrong, and that's wrong, and that's wrong, and help me with it.
What struck me so much in Songs for the Missing was that it wasn't really a thriller, even though it began that way. A young girl disappears suddenly. The family is panicked. They try to find her, and the whole book is them trying to find her. And it really gets into the mechanics of trying to find someone. Everything
that they have to do, everything they go through. I wanted it to be more realistic than you see this. It's almost like a stock plot in a way, right? The missing person.
That way, yes.
It is. Someone goes missing. Oh, what happens?
Right.
Well, in the CSI Without a Trace world, the most exciting thing then is always finding out how the terrible thing happened, which is the worst thing in the world, right? That shouldn't be the payoff. The payoff is how this experience changes those people and what it does to their relationships, because it does terrible things to their relationships, and also sometimes makes them much stronger in a way. Like Lindsay, by the end of that book, is incredibly, incredibly strong, but only because she's cut off sort of part of herself there. Right. And as that book went along, I found the book was more and more about the pain of not being known.
Definitely.
Even by the people closest to you. Even when you're pushing them away, you still want to be known.
Right. I know. That seems to me like an extremely unpleasant book to be with for a year. I thought it was an amazing novel. Emotionally really difficult.
I didn't think so in the writing it, because the intimacy of that world, it's a cloistered world, because they circle the wagons, right? They batten up the house against the media,
right.
And so the drama of that world is very, very intimate and almost super personal in a way, and that's the stuff that I love to write. The characters who are sort of forced back in upon themselves. And in that book, as with Emily and some other ones, I noticed that I'm writing basically the literary fiction equivalent of French film. Oh. So there's Juliette Binoche kind of looking out the window going, I am sad. The long held shot, which I tell my students never do that, all these one-person scenes. But I love the one-person scene in that you draw so much closer to people in times of great duress in those one-person scenes. You can't make them go on and on forever, of course. But I like that. I like that quietness and that stillness there. And that's what I love about Maxwell and Virginia Woolf. They both do that very well. Also Alice Munro. Right. Now, the most important scenes with Alice Munro aren't between people.
Right.
They're with people by themselves.
Definitely. It's changing, but I read a lot of literary fiction in which the economy has no place at all. They live in this kind of never land. Money, politics never comes up. Your novels are rooted right into the economic structure of our lives. That's a self-conscious thing? You're interested in that, the way economics is affecting us?
Well, I mean, it goes back to that sort of, how do you get through the days? And what most people do to get through the days is work.
Exactly.
They have a job.
Right.
Someone said to me, well, your books are about people that go to work, come home, and watch television. I was like, I guess. But it's funny because the first 5 novels are all historical.
Yes.
There was no trace of contemporary America in those first 5 books. And in fact, the last one was Prayer for the Dying, which is basically long, long ago and far, far away.
Right.
And I made it up sort of just out of my imagination, very little research whatsoever. But after doing the nonfiction book, The Circus Fire,
Right.
when I talked to a lot of people, and also a lot of people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, I came back from that and ended up writing much more contemporary and realistic fiction about what people are doing right now.
Oh, interesting.
So it just seems sort of natural to me that coming from Pittsburgh, where the economy has ruled our everyday lives for like the past 35 or 40 years, it seems impossible to sort of just shrug off what's sort of happening in the world and around these people.
Right.
And
You mentioned this, the book you wrote about the fire. It was in Connecticut?
yeah, Hartford.
Barnum and Bailey, was that it?
Ringling Brothers, Barnum
Ringling
and Bailey,
Brothers,
yeah,
yeah.
1944.
The tent catches on fire and all these people are burned
probably
to
the
death.
wrong thing to talk about right here.
It's
but,
an incredibly dramatic and terrifying story, all
yeah.
true.
Yeah, a very tough story, yeah.
When which you interviewed people. What I'm getting at, not many fiction writers switch to nonfiction like that very comfortably. You haven't done it often. Are you going to do it again?
No, I didn't really want to then either, but I was kind of stuck with the story because the story was, to me, very fascinating, but no one had put the book together. I wanted to read the book, but there wasn't one.
Why not write a novel about it? I mean, it has a lot of elements.
People ask me about that, why not write a novel, but the story was, there's so much hearsay that surrounded it, and so many legends and so much misinformation that I wanted to get the facts down sort of once and for all, and in a very old-fashioned, objective, journalistic kind of way, point A to point B, what happened, who did it happen to, let's hear their voices, let's hear what they have to say about it,
Right.
But I knew nothing about the subject whatsoever. So I went to my reference librarian, thank God for librarians, and I said, I need to know everything about Hartford, and about the circus, and about fire. I needed those 3 things, and she was like, yeah, let's do it.
That's great.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
great.
it was great. And that one got me out into the community way more than fiction ever did. So it was very exciting that way. But I also fell very deep into the research and did way too much research. I have no background as a journalist whatsoever. And the first thing a journalist learns is the more sources that you have, the more confusing the story is for your reader. I just went out to get as many sources as possible. So it was just this big sort of stew of stuff. That, technically not a great book, I think. Good coverage, but
Oh, yeah.
could have been better.
Oh, well.
But
It's very modest
a
of
first stab.
you. Your novels are getting shorter.
I'm not sure if they are.
They've been pretty short lately.
Well, Emily came in around 400, I think. Songs came in around 500, but I cut it down. Again, too much detail, too much research.
Right.
I actually dumped 2 late chapters out of that book.
Interesting.
Which moved it in a whole different way. No. In Songs, we had an outside character, the woman that actually finds the body.
Oh, my gosh.
Giving it away there. But she actually had point of view chapters because she became obsessed from the outside with his story, which I think is part of that idea of having your private life or your private pain being made public.
Right.
Suddenly people attach themselves to it, and I wanted to show that as well.
Right.
But she kind of broke that shell of here we are in the family. She became this sort of orbiting, moon there, and my editor and I fought desperately about it, and he won.
Okay.
Yeah.
Stephen King once said that there was no place in our publishing world for novellas. You couldn't sell the short story.
Right, yeah.
You couldn't sell it as a novel. I wonder if you're sort of making that work, particularly with a book like The Odds.
Well, now you can because of electronic publishing.
Yeah, talk about how that might affect what we read.
Well, right now you can publish an e-story and charge 99 cents for it or $1.99 for it, and there will be an audience there. And in the old days, the difficulty with writing from the author's standpoint was distribution. You had to have an agent to get you to a New York house, and the New York house would get you the distributor that could get you all the way across the country on shelves where people could buy your book.
Right.
Nowadays, without most of the brick and mortar stores, the delivery system is right there in people's hands. They can get the story on a phone. How many people here have a phone on them? Some sort of phone. Yeah. And so right there, if I said, "Oh, I got this great new short story. I just put it up now," somebody here, maybe my wife, would buy it. She'd say, "Yeah, heck yes, I'll buy that for 99 cents." And with a novella, in the old days, it was, well, it's not a big enough book.
Right. What do you do with 80 pages?
What do you do with 85 pages in a lot of white space? And you've got the printing cost and the overhead, and then getting it out to the stores, and then convincing everyone that, oh yeah, someone's going to buy it, because the industry common knowledge is no one buys short stories, nobody buys novellas.
And we don't review them.
I don't believe that, but that's what everybody always says from New York.
Right.
Now you can kind of hop over New York and go directly to the reader.
Are you about to do that?
Stop laughing. That's my wife laughing. Am I about to do that? I hope to do that in this next week or so.
Really?
I'm hoping to. We'll see. I can't divulge any details right now, but
well, that's interesting.
We'll see. I've yet to write a word of this thing, but I love the novella. I think Stephen King's favorite book of mine is Different Seasons, and in Different Seasons he's got The Body, Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption, Apt Pupil, and The Breathing Method. Mm-hmm. 4 great novellas, all sort of shoved together. Did the book sell? It probably didn't sell as well as the novels before it and after it. But over the years, I think it's sold and sold and sold. And we know those stories. They're kind of standard American stories now.
How did you get to know Stephen King?
Well, I tried to title a book of mine, Dear Stephen King. And it got out to Hollywood. And it became The Speed Queen, which is the story about Marjorie Standiford, who is about to be executed for her part in a spree killing that took place on Route 66. And Stephen King buys the rights to her life story, sends her a questionnaire to answer in the final hours before her death. So she takes a bunch of speed, and she answers his questions in the way that she wants to answer them.
So the novel is her response to
Stephen King's questions. The novel is her tape-recorded response to all these questions. And, of course, she's like a politician. She's going to answer what she wants to, how she wants to. And she's a wonderful, unreliable narrator and a great storyteller, I think. She spins this wild, wild tale there. So because it was such a departure from before I was writing sort of tragic, I guess they were calling it blue-collar fiction, which I never agreed with. But this was just sort of wacky satire, crazy American road movie satire. So I figured a title like Dear Stephen King would let the reader know that you're not getting the usual Stewart O'Nan novel.
Right.
Well, his lawyers out in Hollywood weren't real happy about that. So, but I got to know him because I said, forget the lawyers, let's just talk writer to writer. Yes. Here's why I like this title. Here's why I think it's right for the book. And he said, well, I hate people using my name as sort of shorthand for bad writing or shorthand for anything. And so I kind of agreed with him that way. And we just got to know each other. We have the same roots in, rock and roll and bad horror movies and comic books and science fiction from the 50s. I mean, we share so much culturally, and we're both Red Sox fans. And
you wrote a book together about this?
Later we wrote a book about the Red Sox together. But at that point, he said, well, I know you're a Sox fan. Maybe someday we can go to the game together.
Nice.
And I was like, well, that's never going to happen. It's never, ever going to happen. And then one day he called me up out of the blue and said, hey, Stewart, do you want to go to the game tonight? And I was like, yes. Why, of course. I would love to go to the game with you tonight. And often when you have this long-distance relationship with somebody and you get together for the first time, it's kind of weird and it doesn't quite work out. Yes. But with him, we sat down. Within 5 minutes, we were just sort of riffing off each other and having a big old time. And from then on, we went to games together and just had a good time and have become friends. And
that's great.
Yeah, it's really, really neat because when I was a teenager, I would wait down at our local drugstore that had the lending library that charged you $0.25 for the new book when it came out, and I would be the first one in line for that Stephen King book, and I'd pay the $0.25 and I'd read it all that night, read the whole thing just for $0.25. So to actually be working with him on a book and to have his words, to have his prose and edit them and work with him before anybody else, I was like, this is crazy.
That's
wild.
Great. That's great. A lot of people here probably have manuscripts in desk drawers.
I do.
Rotting away. Yeah, I want to hear.
Yeah, I got 4
Would you
of
be
them.
willing to tell us about one project that just did not work?
One project that did not work.
Everything you write is a success?
No, one project that didn't work was a horror novel called The Ghost Ship, which I began writing around 1999. I wanted to write a send-up, a parody of a horror novel. And this was a horror novel that was going to be written by an African-American writer who had been overlooked, who said, there has to be a great African-American horror novel. There isn't one yet. We need a great one, because what is more horrifying in America than the African-American experience in America?
Okay.
And so he was going to write this horror novel about an amusement park very much like Cedar Point up in Sandusky, Ohio. And it was going to be set basically in 2 time frames, much like It. That is, there was a group of kids who had this terrible thing happen to them back in the mid-50s. I think I'd pick 1954 for its significance, right?
Okay.
And then in the present, they're going to reopen this ghost ship that had burned down back then.
Yes.
And the evil in the ghost ship, because it had been made with pieces of an old slave ship there.
Okay.
And the Africans on their way over had died down in the holds of these slave ships and had cast spells and carved spells into the wood, which was then used in the ghost ship.
Sounds cool.
It's all right. It's okay. And as I was doing the research, I found out, in fact, that Sandusky was an important stop on the Underground Railroad. And that, in fact, right across from Cedar Point, there's a graveyard filled with Confederate officers who had died in a prison camp right there. So everything was kind of coming together then. I was like, this is really pretty cool. And I plotted the whole thing out, and I wrote about 100 pages, and it just went flat. I knew way too much of it. The performance of it as the sort of framed narrator author wasn't working at all. It was way too cute. It just wasn't working.
Who do you trust to tell you bad news?
Me.
You.
Me, yeah.
You know.
You can feel it. You can feel it. When you dread going to the page every day, when you have to sort of like ramp yourself up and say, okay, I'm going to write this scene today. I knew it was sort of just dead on the vine. I was like, okay, it's not going to work. And so then I started to say, how can I salvage this? Because I'd gone to Cedar Point, I'd done the research, I had all this stuff, I had all these interviews I did with people that had worked there, and it wasn't going to happen.
No.
But I did get to go to Cedar Point.
Yeah,
which was
That's
awesome.
fun.
Yeah.
What contemporary authors do you like reading now?
Sarah Shinlin Bynum.
Oh, she's very clever.
So good.
Very clever.
Christine Scott. She did a book called Florida back in 2004, and then later a book called All Souls.
Oh, okay.
A few years ago. Mm-hmm. Yeah, really good. I loved The Sisters Brothers by Patrick DeWitt.
Oh,
I thought that was a
great
marvelous novel. Great novel.
That is cool.
Christy Hodgin, Elegies for the Brokenhearted. Marvelous book in the second person, but not a trick at all. Just really smart, well done, and moving. Incredibly moving.
Right.
There. And Alice Munro, she's been around since the 60s, but she seems to always do good work. There's so few writers that are consistently good and surprising and moving, and I think she's almost always that way.
Yes.
Which is amazing. She's a genius, I think. Stephen Milhauser, who in another form, he does that performance thing, and I think he does it better than almost anybody.
He is a genius.
He is a genius. Of the short story, he is an absolute genius. They could have given We Others the Pulitzer, but he'd already won the Pulitzer, right?
It can be won twice.
It's a special case, though, in that they gave his worst book the Pulitzer, Martin Dressler.
That wasn't so bad.
Compared to the others, the others
stories are better.
The others are spectacular.
He was just here. He was a finalist for the Penn Faulkner.
Yeah, and deservedly so.
Yeah.
Wonderful writer.
15 years ago, you edited a book about John Gardner,
Yeah, a long time ago.
who had a big
ages and
influence
ages
on
ago.
me. What did he teach you about writing?
Well, I think Gardner's most important thing was that idea of the vivid, continuous dream. That is, and don't get in the way of that, right? Don't get all fancy, and stand in front of. If your characters are there and your reader is there, you shouldn't be here going like this. You shouldn't call too much attention to yourself. You don't have to be, as Joyce said, paring your nails back behind the clouds like God. But there's, let the story come through, and don't tell the reader how to feel. Let them connect with the character. Let them try to feel how the character feels as they're going through this thing. That's what the reader's there for. The reader wants the question answered, how does it feel to be you? Because I don't know you, and I want to know you through the book. And that in fiction, that's always that leap that we make, that leap of empathy. That definitely, I think, was the most important thing that Gardner told me.
You teach writing now, right?
A little. I do drop-ins here and there. I was just at Ohio State last week.
Can it be done, or is it just a way to...
Well, I mean, if Flannery O'Connor can go to the Iowa workshop and then come out and do the work that she did, I think...
But did she just go in as Flannery O'Connor and then come out?
Well, I think most people do. Most people do go into workshops as Flannery O'Connor. Most people go into the workshops with a lot of the mood and the tone and the direction of their work already there. It's a question of letting them understand that they need to get out of their own way and get to it there. Like I was up at Cornell about last year, and Taya Obrecht was there. And she was just sort of breaking out.
Right.
I mean, she's fresh right out of the program there, but she's an amazing, amazing talent. And I know that she benefited from just a few little sort of guiding pushes here, little nudges here and there. Plus, I mean, you can't underestimate how powerful it is to be given a book like So Long, See You Tomorrow if you've never read it before. Right? And that's a book that any writing program you go to, you're going to run into that book. Someone is going to give you that book. And I think that's going to broaden you as a writer, no matter who you are. There.
Would you take some questions from the
sure.
audience here?
Love to, except for my wife. No questions.
All right.
No more questions.
I don't know if we have a microphone or not. Oh, in the middle there.
In the middle there.
Could you go to that mic? Thanks.
By the way, thank you all for coming out on such a nice day.
Oh, it's a gorgeous day.
It's a beautiful day. And no Red Sox questions. Not after last night.
Where do you get your ideas? Are you going through the grocery store one day and you're like, the fruit, this is a story?
Well, Stephen King had two answers for this one. One was Sears, and the other was Utica. I tend to get my inspiration from the people closest to me. I mean, certainly the inspiration for Emily Alone was my mother, no doubt about that, and my grandmothers, my aunts, my mother-in-law. But sometimes I'll run across something in the newspaper. I like to read the really cheap newspapers, like when they send you the Penny Saver or like the Herald Valley News or something. And that's where I found the story about the Red Lobster closing.
One of those.
There's a tiny little article that said, regulars from the Red Lobster came from church directly to the Red Lobster on Sunday and found the front doors chained and padlocked. And I just thought, that's kind of strange. It's an odd little, it's a little scene, it's a little moment there. Yeah. And I thought, well, that's really odd. I could probably do something with that. Of course, I mean, it took me 4 or 5 years to even figure out, what it was about. But I did cut the article out and I put it in a little cubby hole so I could sort of come back to it later.
What's your favorite item at Red Lobster?
Well, I think everyone's favorite item at Red Lobster is the Cheddar Bay biscuits. I think everybody loves those because they are bottomless. And they really can be. I actually like Red Lobster. I mean, after the book came out, a lot of reporters would take me there because they thought it was funny and ironic and all that. And I was like, yeah, it's great. It's fun. I had no problem with it. No problem whatsoever.
Yeah. I took my family there when I was reviewing it.
Oh, very nice. Right. How was it?
Yeah, they wouldn't go.
My son did not want to go this one time. I was doing research and I said, we're going. We're just going.
Yeah.
And he got there and he just started chowing down on the Cheddar Bay biscuits. And said, this is not bad. It's like, yeah, it's casual dining.
Yes, miss?
Have I heard anything from the Darden Group that owns Red Lobster? Well, not officially, but the very first reading I did was at Florida State University, which is near Orlando, which is the corporate headquarters. And after I did the reading, the book hadn't even come out at this point, there was a guy, and he basically slid his card across the desk, and it had the Red Lobster logo on it. So I guess I was on their radar. But the book is almost... a love letter of a sort to the Red Lobster. So they've never sort of come down on me hard. Whereas Sonic, there's a Sonic, or was a Sonic, in Dear Stephen King. And the Sonic Corporation, a terrible massacre happens there. A very hilarious and terrible massacre happens there. And the Sonic Corporation was not amused, not at all. And their lawyers sent letters to Doubleday saying, this has got to go. You've given people a blueprint on how to rob a Sonic.
Oh.
And blood, they said this, blood will be on your hands.
Jeez.
And I was like, it's a Sonic. They walk in with a gun. It's pretty simple. There's, not a lot of strategy involved. But they did end up changing it. Doubleday, they changed it to Mach 6 in the paperback version.
Wow.
So they although there is still an illustration that was written just for the book that still says Sonic on it. So
Nice.
don't tell Sonic.
Yes, sir.
Do you have a rigorous schedule you follow for writing, or do you just go let the muse carry you from day to day? Maybe one day goes a lot, another day a little.
Just repeat.
Do I have a rigorous schedule for writing, or do I let the muse just come to me? Do I write a lot one day and a little another day? I'm pretty steady. I think, like Ron said, methodical. I'll sit down at 9 o'clock, and by 5 o'clock, I'll usually have my one page. Maybe I'll have a little bit more, but I'm not trying to race through it. I'm not trying to get a lot down. I just want to be patient, very steady, every day. And you can write a lot one day and it can be terrible. You can write a lot one day and it can be great. You can write very little and it can be great. I mean, you never quite know. So you're looking for consistency and just keeping at it, little by little by little. Short stories, sometimes they'll just hit me and I'll be like, wow, okay, I got to get this down, and I'll just roar through them, and I'll do a short story, at least a draft of it, in like 2 or 3 days. But in a novel, it's just very steady, very, little by little. No one out there is clamoring. No one says, we need it bad. It's, come on, if you're not done by such and such time. You're supposed to write, I think Ray Bradbury said, you're supposed to write as if you have all the time in the world. Of course you don't, but you try to write as if you have all the time in the world. And I feel that way sometimes up in my attic. And, the hours pass. Sometimes they drag. Sometimes they just fly by. But the idea is to be sort of just happy that you're up there and with your characters. Because that, to me, that's the payoff. Writing to me is very much like reading, in that when you're reading a book that you really, really like, that you're really into, you don't want to do anything else. You just want to read that book.
So you have to like your characters.
I guess.
Lionel Shriver said she found that really annoying. She doesn't like her characters sometimes. She thinks they're terrible people.
Well, yeah, she does write about people that they're often terrible. And
she thought she hated being criticized for that.
It's always difficult, the unsympathetic character or the ambivalent character,
Right.
there, which I tend to write about. I mean, I rarely write a straight-ahead, lovable, sentimental, happy character. They're all relatively difficult or odd.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see her point. It's more fun to write about an unsympathetic character because that character can do more things. They have more range, I mean, if you have two characters walking down the street and one is known to spit or kick other people, things can get interesting really fast.
Right.
There.
Yeah.
You want a troublemaker as a character.
Yeah. I can see that. Yes, miss? We can repeat your question.
Yeah, I'll repeat it. Huh. What details do I take out? Because she's writing a novel now, and each chapter seems to her a little bit too much like a skeleton, so she feels she has to flesh it in more. Well, I mean, like John Barr said, there's two types of writers. One, they're the putter-inners, and they're the taker-outers, right? In my draft work, I'm a putter-inner. I just lard things up, I see a sentence, I just stuff it full. A paragraph, a section, a chapter, anything. I make them really large so that I can come back later and tear things out. What I tend to tear out are any details that do not impinge in some way on my characters, my point of view characters' true desires. Whether the character knows what those desires are or not, right? So take anything out that does not impinge on the main character's true desires. Often I found early on when I was writing that the books were getting larger and larger and larger because my favorite writer is Tolstoy. Yeah. So and my favorite novel is Anna Karenina. So it came to this point where every minor character was getting a point of view section because I found them fascinating. The reader was not finding them fascinating at all. So basically, you're in service to the reader. Right? Hemingway said, in the first draft, the writer has all the fun. In the last draft, the reader better be the one having all the fun. There. So I tend to do that. So I tend to strip down and thin things out. But at the same time, I came up as a writer during the 1980s, which was a very sort of despair style was in vogue then.
Yes.
Right? The minimalists were in then.
Yes.
So I think naturally I always worry about having too much stuff and too many adjectives, too many adverbs, just too much sort of local color. It's like Mark Twain said, I took all the weather out of the book, and there was nothing left.
Anyone else?
Yes.
ma'am.
I guess it might be a strange question to ask with Ron Charles here, but how do critical reviews affect you? You've written a book and you read the criticism.
How do critical reviews affect me when I've written the book and then I read the criticism? Reviews, the first thing is for writers, and I think most of them understand this, reviews don't make a book one word better or one word worse, right? They don't. But they can bring readers to a book that otherwise would not get there, especially if a book is quiet or if a book is off the beaten track, or if a book is not if it's not that publisher's sort of lead title, especially in literary fiction, if it's not the lead title for that season, it's not going to get any advertising whatsoever. So you had better have reviews, because for literary fiction, all the major publishers believe and have believed for many years that advertising does not work. There's no other retail business that works that way, but publishing is still that way, which is very weird, I think. Sometimes when you read a review, the one that you appreciate the most is that tells you something about the book that you hadn't quite known or you hadn't quite realized, because you're always too close to the characters and too close to the action and all that. Sometimes a reader can sort of pull back and say, well, this is what he's doing here. And that's always exciting. And like Ron for Songs for the Missing, when instead of criticizing it the way that a lot of reviewers would, which is here is a mystery that sets up and then does not pay off on a mystery, he says, well, he's not trying to write a mystery. What he's trying to do is write about real life and how it would really feel. And I was like, Eureka! Now, exactly. That's what I was sort of hoping to do, even though I didn't quite know it at the time there. So sometimes a really good review, a really, what's the word for it, insightful review can show you things that you've been working towards but haven't quite sort of put into words, haven't quite realized in a way. The bad review is the review that gets the names of the characters wrong, or just misrepresents the book. And when I'm writing reviews, I'm always like, I'm here to represent the book to the reader. I want to let the reader know what this book really is, so the reader can then make up their mind whether they want to read it or not. But you're going to get bad reviews, and bad reviews are better than no reviews, right? Always. I think, unless you get the scathing, scary review, like in the Times. There was that Mona Simpson review where they trashed not only her most recent book, but everything she'd written before and herself as a person. And I was like, what the hell happened? Who I don't know. Who stiffed someone for a telephone bill? It was weird. No. You've got one?
Fiction that doesn't sell.
How do we define? Yes. How do we define literary fiction? That's a great question. That's a great question.
I was just being facetious. You probably have a real answer.
I think of literary fiction more often than not tries to get at the heart of how people are. What people do, how people live, how we really feel. Even if it's, a fantasy literary fiction, it's trying to get at some larger truth about life. I don't mean that it, has all the details photographically correct, but it's trying to tell us something about who we are, I think. I think of Chekhov as sort of the classic literary writer in his short stories. He says, I don't have to answer a question. I just have to frame the question about life correctly, and then you will feel it. I think that's what literary fiction is.
Yeah, and it is kind of a qualitative term. I mean, it is a term of approval of some kind.
True. But, even though I think there are great books, I don't know. I'm thinking of a guy like Ray Bradbury, something like Fahrenheit 451.
Right.
It's one of the great science fiction novels of all time.
Right.
But it could also be seen as a literary book too, couldn't it? And it's working out of theme and.
Then you're just using the term as a qualitative term. right?
No, not just the quality of it, but what it's doing, what it's trying to do. I don't know.
We often get reviews of thrillers and mysteries that say this has some sort of literary quality.
A
to
literary
it.
thriller.
Yes, that's
Yes.
which suggests that it's more finely written in some way.
Can you think of a literary thriller that actually is a literary thriller? Turn of the Screw? Is that a literary thriller? It's not really a thriller.
Yeah, no. It definitely is literary fiction, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
No, because this kind of runs back to like the Donna Tartt days, right?
Right.
Right. It was supposed to be a literary novel, but in fact,
Alan First.
a mystery. Alan First, yes.
Writes spy novels good enough to be called literary fiction. Don't you think?
Why are they good enough to be called literary fiction?
What
What do they concentrate on?
Psychological depth,
Okay.
the details of the place and the times. That
Okay.
sort of thing. It's a pretty
Well,
mushy
maybe
term.
depth. Is that what we
Yeah.
want from literary books? Depth. Maybe not. It doesn't have to be wonderful writing. I mean, Dreiser's a literary writer. He can't write a lick. I mean,
It is a pretty imprecise term, though.
yeah.
We'd agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Ah, a stylist. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. What constitutes a real stylist? Usually someone that can't get out of his way, right?
I get the
He's
feeling
tripping all over himself.
from this hour that you don't like a lot of highly regarded contemporary fiction.
Oh, of course I do. Of course I do. No, I mean, if the barrel is empty, it doesn't matter how wonderful the outside of it is painted, right? But no, I mean, there are wonderful stylists. I think Jonathan Franzen is a wonderful stylist.
Yes.
I think he's a marvelous stylist. His sense of metaphor, and especially sort of the Baroque metaphor, is lovely,
Right.
I think. And it's also very fitting to the awkwardness of his characters.
Right.
I think, yeah, his style fits his subject, and those two things go together, and they create something that's got some real, like we say, depth to it, and depth to the characters, and it's funny, you know. I'm trying to think of a stylist that has gotten too caught up in the style. I would say that a guy like William H. Gass, you know, the anti-Gardner,
Right.
kind of got caught up too much in the style of something like The Tunnel. So he made what was ultimately a literary artifact, right? Or Mark Danilewski, House of Leaves.
Okay.
Even in God Rest His Soul, David Foster Wallace, in some places, got too caught up in the language and too caught up with the medium, the mechanism.
Jeffrey
to let
Eugenides?
through. No, I don't think so.
I think he's a gorgeous writer.
He can be a gorgeous
Really
writer.
witty, too.
Yeah, he can't. He's not funny though.
You don't think he's funny?
See, I think Franzen's funny. Franzen makes you laugh out loud because the situations are so charged and comic
He's
and
so
pathetic
bitter
there.
compared to Eugenides.
Yeah, but I think that helps him actually.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But yeah, I mean, there's certain stylists that we recognize their style a mile off, no matter what they're writing. They could be
Right.
writing a grocery list.
Right.
You know, Dennis Johnson.
Right.
You recognize his style. Is that style always appropriate to everything he's writing about? Probably not. Again, David Foster Wallace.
Right.
You know, I think when you change subject, you need to kind of change style. Otherwise, it becomes shtick, right? It becomes like I was in a Hallmark store once, and I heard James Taylor singing some Christmas song, and he was singing it with the same intonation that he would sing one of his sort of love songs. And I was like, well, it's like he's going to put the same spices on every food, you know? You got, I mean, a change of style is a change of subject, right? And
Nice.
or demands a change. To me, and this may be the engineer in me speaking, I think there's always one unique, singular solution that can get across this emotional world of the character to the reader in the very best way. It could be long-winded, it could be very spare, it could be first person, second person, third person, you know, it could be, you know, long chapters, short chapters, but there's one best way to do it, and finding that best way is part of that conception.
Right.
It's not just sort of cranking up your old wind machine and just throwing some ingredients into it, you know. And I mean, that's kind of the way it feels to me
Right.
sometimes when you see the same writer writing the same kind of stuff over and over and over,
Yes.
and they get stuck in it.
Yeah, I can see that.
You know.
Yes, ma'am.
Outlined your writing schedule, and you seem thoroughly well read. I mean, you're rattling off all these authors. When do you find time to do all this writing that you're doing? A new book every year,
Well, I'll write during the day, and then at night I'll read. And I usually try to read something that has some connection or some bearing on what I'm trying to do in my book, whether it's cautionary or exemplary, or just sort of alongside it there. But I'd rather read than write. And Flannery O'Connor is always like, don't give up your time to reading, because your writing time is more valuable than your reading time. But having just taught at a few universities in the last year or so, there are a lot of young writers who aren't reading enough.
That's what I always
They
thought.
need to read more. And the work is out there. The great work is out there. So, grab as many great books you can and learn from them. Read with a pencil. Always be taking notes. Always see how someone deals with something, so that when you come up against some sort of subject that demands that singular solution, you may have a choice of literally hundreds and thousands of ways of doing this, like Prayer for the Dying. I wouldn't have found that second person if I hadn't read Robert O'Connor's Buffalo Soldiers. It's a lovely, lovely book. His second person works in a different way than mine does, but seeing how his work said, what if I use that same kind of thing on my character, which works kind of flip it, and see how it works. And when I started working on it, I was like, hey, that works kind of interesting. That could actually work. But if I hadn't never run into Buffalo Soldiers, I would have just sort of gone along with a first person, and it wouldn't have worked at all.
Right.
So try to read broadly. Try to read as a writer. Keep that eye out for the opportunity, because you never know when that. Like without Updike, I can't do Last Night at the Lobster. There's no way I can do Manny without Rabbit. No way.
Very interesting.
No.
Yeah. Well, it's great to talk to you. It's a real pleasure.
A great pleasure,
Sure.
Ron. And thank you. Thank you for everything. Thank you all for coming out.